This is a blurry picture of a man strapped into a harness that I pulled out of an issue of the Brisbane Times from back in May of 1927. And the following is the accompanying caption: balloon jumping. This new sport was witnessed at Stagline Aerodrome near London recently, when Air Craftsman Dobbs gave a demonstration. The balloonist springs from the air and is carried along down over the hills to safety. This picture shows Air Craftsman Dobbs about to start on his new adventure. He was subsequently electrocuted by overhead wires when balloon jumping. This is going to be a weird one. All right, so what exactly is balloon jumping, right? Well, there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is pretty simple. Balloon jumping was a briefly popular sport in the 1920s and 30s where you'd strap a gigantic gas balloon to your back and then leap across the countryside, taking huge 100-foot bounds with your jumping power massively increased by the lift of the balloon. A lot of balloon jumping's biggest proponents hoped that the sport would one day become this big-time, huge consumer activity, but it never really graduated past public demonstrations at county fairs and airshow events, and so by the 1940s, balloon jumping was pretty much dead. And that's the short answer. The long answer, though, is a little bit more complicated. Just for starters, it seems to me that no one back then really even knew for sure where balloon jumping came from. Some newspaper articles claimed that the sport first got big in Germany, and others said that it came from Canada. And I even found one guy in 1933 who said that he actually made the first ever balloon jump in Paris when he leapt over the Eiffel Tower in a single bound under cover of darkness. Although apparently this guy put just a little bit too much gas into his balloon before the jump, so he cleared the Eiffel Tower no problem, and then he just kept sailing up into the air till he thought real quick, pulled a pin off his vest, popped a hole in his balloon, and slowly, carefully floated back down to Earth. But weird stuff like that aside though, far and away the most confusion about balloon jumping's country of origin stems from this bizarre little dance that the American and British press got into over the sport. For whatever reason, each country's journalists almost always tried to claim that the other nation invented the sport. For example, an article about balloon jumping in the United States is probably going to say that the sport was invented in England, where supposedly it's already this well-established form of recreation that's very popular among the country's hikers and athletes. And likewise, if you read an English article about the activity, you'll instead learn that balloon jumping is actually America's latest sport, and practitioners over in the States are bounding across the landscape on cross-country balloon jumping expeditions. This little phenomenon became such a big thing that I even found a few journalists calling attention to how weird it is that neither country seemed to want to take credit for the sport. Look at this guy from Pennsylvania talking about how a recent magazine article about balloon jumping kept referring to it as an old world sport, despite the fact that across the Atlantic in the old world, they're saying the exact opposite. Or look at this, an even better example. An English reporter in 1927 remarking on how strange it is that nobody really has any photos or real information about this massive new sport that supposedly is taking the United States by storm. If you ask me, I think both countries were probably just trying to make balloon jumping seem more compelling and revolutionary by painting the sport as this hot, new, exotic activity that everybody's getting into overseas. In reality though, I think the sport's true origins will always remain just a little bit nebulous. A lot of sources say that balloon jumping was invented by a former US Army engineer named Matt Corbett, which does make a lot of sense when you consider that early on, balloon jumping actually underwent testing as a potential military tool, mostly for observation and reconnaissance. And in fact, while we're on the subject, I actually found a very strange little story from 1936 that originated out of Russia, of all places. Apparently, in February of that year, the Russian army sent 5 airmen up into the sky on jumping balloons who promptly vanished without a trace. It was -8 outside when they went up, and the point of the exercise was an endurance test to see if the soldiers could handle being strapped to their balloons for 24 hours straight. This story actually got a ton of coverage all across the world before the 5 airmen eventually turned up in Moscow after a supposed 125-mile journey on their balloons, which sounds a little bit far-fetched to me, I gotta admit. Although, believe it or not, the basic idea that you could travel for miles with your jumping balloon definitely was not a fabrication. See, there was actually 2 different types of balloon jumping. The first is the basic setup. You just weigh yourself and then you use a giant balloon to offset your weight until you effectively weigh just a few pounds or even ounces, depending on how ambitious you want to get. And there you go, you're ready to balloon jump. Sometimes jumpers would also recommend tying a whole bunch of sandbags to your harness so that you can cut the bags loose when you're way up in the air, and that way you can increase your altitude even further. But if you really wanted to fly up high, then there was something else you could add to your balloon. The second type of balloon jumping actually featured a hand crank propeller that you would install beneath the balloon. With this setup, you could bend down into a jump like normal and push off the ground and leap a few dozen feet up into the air using the balloon's natural buoyancy, and then at the apex of your jump, you start cranking that propeller, and before you know it, you are thousands of feet up into the clouds. Like, some of the stories that I found about this particular type of balloon jumping are just unreal. Like claims from jumpers that they reach heights of 3,000 feet and tales of jumps that went for 22 miles without touching the ground, and all these whispers that practitioners actually wanted to keep balloon jumping kind of hush hush, and they actually didn't want to make a big deal out of it because they were afraid that if the sport ever got too much publicity, then it might get banned for being too dangerous. Like, this was not a sport for the faint of heart. Even the non-propeller balloons could get way, way up there. Like, just look at some of these pictures I found of people flying through the sky 100 feet off the ground with just a gigantic balloon strapped to their back, and that's it. Now, of course, with that kind of spectacle, it might not surprise you that balloon jumping actually became a fairly successful spectator sport for a few years. In the 1920s and 30s, it was not all that uncommon to see a county fair or an air show advertising a balloon jumping demonstration, or sometimes even a contest to see who could make the furthest leap. I even found a minor balloon jumping celebrity, a 4-year-old boy from Ohio named Billy Crawford, pictured here flying 40 feet off the ground in his miniature jumping balloon. And here is another picture of him at age 6 flying over people's heads in a balloon painted to look like the Earth. It was a different world back then. Now, although balloon jumping enjoyed a decent amount of success as a performance sport, many of its advocates weren't satisfied just with that. No, like, a lot of people saw balloon jumping as a consumer sport, a form of recreation that anybody could enjoy. I read a ton of articles that painted these huge, grand visions of the future where balloon jumping is a massively popular sport on par with golf or swimming, where everybody has got their own jumping rig, and we're gonna have air beaches for balloon jumpers to hang out at, and we're gonna play air baseball way up in the sky, because, you know, balloon jumping combines the pleasures of flying and the exercise of hiking. So everybody is going to want to do it because you can jump 40 miles in a balloon with the same amount of effort that it would take you to hike 1 mile. I found people who want to incorporate balloon jumping into horse racing so that horses and jockeys can go flying through the sky whenever the horse takes a jump. And this guy over here says that if you get tired while balloon jumping, then you can just light as a feather, touch your feet down to the top of a tree, and enjoy a rest up there. Pretty wild stuff, right? But you want to hear the really crazy part? Even this wasn't enough for some people. No, not only was balloon jumping a somewhat successful spectator sport, and not only was it predicted to become a revolutionary consumer activity, but a lot of people actually thought that balloon jumping would soon penetrate and revolutionize all of modern society. Because balloon jumping is just so awesome and so practical that it's only a matter of time before it becomes the predominant form of personal transportation. So get ready to sell your car and balloon jump to work. Just don't get going too fast, or the balloon cop might pull you over. And hey, of course, with this like new mode of travel, we're also going to have to come up with some new rules of etiquette, right? Like, for example, when you encounter a lady on the street, do you jump over her or around her? And is it permissible to cuss out another balloonist for improper signaling? And can more than one jumper park in the same tree at the same time? But okay, in addition to all these like wild visions of a new balloon jumping world, I also found a whole bunch of jumpers suggesting some slightly more realistic applications for balloon jumping as a practical tool. Like maybe radio operators can use balloons to leap way up in the air and get a better signal. And maybe we can handle invasive insect problems by jumping up to the treetops and giving the bugs a surprise dose of pesticide. And maybe pedestrians can wear small balloons on their backs whenever they're walking down the street so that if a car's about to hit them, they can just leap into the air and dodge the speeding automobile. Believe it or not, this kind of like balloon jumping theory crafting actually became a big enough thing that even Henry Ford reportedly was keeping an eye on the fledgling sport. And he wasn't the only well-known name to show some interest either. Like, remember a second ago, I showed you that clipping of somebody suggesting that we could use balloon jumping to dodge car accidents? Well, the man behind that idea was none other than Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books. Pretty crazy, right? Like, I even found a picture of a woman in 1930 demonstrating how pedestrians might be able to jump over cars. So we all just gotta start walking around with 3 giant balloons strapped to our backs at all time, and we'll basically solve the problem of cars hitting people. But okay, with all this press and all this publicity and all these grand ideas for a balloon jumping future, what happened? What happened to balloon jumping? How come it never took off? And how come we all aren't leaping around today with our own personal balloons? Well, as you might expect, there were quite a few problems with balloon jumping that ultimately led to its failure. Probably the most immediate one being the ridiculous cost of acquiring and operating a jumping balloon. A full setup, including balloon and harnesses, could cost anywhere between $500 and $3,000 depending on how fancy you want to get, which in today's money would be 10 grand at a minimum and $50,000 for a top-end setup. And if that's not enough, You also got to fill up your 18-foot balloon with hydrogen gas every time that you want to go jumping, which is going to cost another $10 or $185 in today's money. So the chances of this ever becoming a widespread consumer sport are pretty much completely deflated just by the price alone. But then on top of the price, there's also an absurd amount of logistical planning that has to go into a balloon jump. See, like all these articles that I've been showing you, they want to make it seem like if you want to go balloon jumping, you just put on the balloon and jump and there you go, you're done. But in reality, it is so much harder than that, mostly because there's a little thing called the wind. Like the entire premise of balloon jumping is based on carefully inflating a balloon so that its pulling power is almost but not quite equal to the weight of the jumper, which sounds simple in theory, but in practice it is almost impossible to inflate a balloon that precisely when it's out in the middle of a field getting whipped around by the wind. Because remember, we're talking about huge balloons here. Even a slight breeze is going to catch a hold of these things. And in fact, most of the time, setting up a balloon jumping demonstration looked a little bit like this. 7 or 8 husky men trying to keep the balloon from flying away while the jumper gets things all measured out and situated. It is not nearly as simple to go balloon jumping as all these people want to make it seem. And of course, while we're talking about the wind, there's another huge elephant in the room here that we haven't discussed yet. A gigantic problem with balloon jumping that a lot of people with these big, grand visions seem to be ignoring. How on earth are you supposed to steer this thing? Like the fancy balloons have the propeller to help you go up and down, but how do you control what direction you're going? Well, the answer is you don't at all. Like whatever direction the wind is blowing, that's the direction you're gonna go. Like even balloon jumping proponents have to admit this. Like here is a balloon manufacturer in 1927 who says that the jumper has zero personal power over where they go. They are completely at the mercy of the wind. So with that little wrinkle in mind, nobody is going to be jumping to work anytime soon unless their job is downwind from their house every morning and then upwind again in the evening. A lot of the articles that I found talking about balloon jumping pointed this out as the single biggest problem with the sport. Like, yeah, sure, it's probably fun to put on your balloon and like hop across a big field for a minute. But then when you get to the end of the field, you can't just turn around and hop back because the wind is blowing against you. So you gotta either deflate the balloon and drag the entire apparatus back across the field, or you can strap it to your car and drive home and just cross your fingers and hope that you don't gotta go under any trees or bridges or something. Like, just check out this article that I found in an aircraft magazine from October of 1927. We got a guy here in the British Army who's trying to give a balloon jumping demonstration, and apparently he had to recruit an entire squad of Boy Scouts just to drag the giant balloon back to the starting place after he was done jumping. Like, look at this quote that the journalist put in the article. "This manual labor would seem to take some of the pleasure from the sport, unless it is possible to get others to do it." So to recap, the balloon costs you as much as a car, and you got to put $200 worth of gas into it every time you want to jump, and you need an entire team of people to help you set everything up, and you can only jump in one single direction, and you need your own personal Boy Scout troop to help you clean up once everything's done. Like, it kind of makes sense why this sport never went anywhere, right? Well, believe it or not, even with all that, we actually still have not yet addressed the single biggest reason why balloon jumping never caught on. And that reason is that it didn't work at all. Like, so far in this video, you might have noticed that I haven't brought up too many specific stories or examples of people actually going balloon jumping. And the reason for that is that a lot of these demonstrations just ended up with the balloon jumper either getting dragged around in the mud or launching out of control 10 billion feet up into the clouds. Like, remember earlier when I was talking about how balloon jumping was actually like this fairly popular spectator sport for a little while at like county fairs and stuff? Well, the reason for that was not because people wanted to go out there and watch these balloon jumpers gracefully leap up into the air and softly alight back on the ground so carefully and daintily like a ballerina. No, the reason they wanted to go and watch these shows is because the majority of the time, the jumping did not work properly at all, and the riders just got jerked all around by the balloon and like thrown around in the wind, and they're desperately trying to exert even the smallest ounce of control over their balloon, while the spectators are just sitting in the bleachers and pointing and laughing at these guys as they're trying not to crack their skulls open. Like, truly, all these people with big ideas about the future of balloon jumping were really, really in denial about how ridiculously dangerous this sport was. Like, many balloon manufacturers just straight up refused to make balloons for jumping because they knew how much of a liability it was. And some airship clubs condemned it as a useless and dangerous sport. Like, this was not something that was ever well respected among serious aeronauts. And in fact, just to really help illustrate that for you, I want to show you a couple of really spectacular articles from journalists who actually went out and gave balloon jumping a try themselves. The first is a reporter from Missouri who went balloon jumping for the very first time at a big field in St. Louis back in 1919. Now, before I tell you what that guy's experience was like, I want to read you this little description I found of what balloon jumping is supposed to entail. If you trust this magazine from 1927, then balloon jumping is so easy that taking off is this graceful, effortless thing, and you fly up in the air and then you land like a seagull alighting on the water, or maybe a leaf softly drifting down on an October day. You'll be so light on your feet that you can literally land on the surface of a pond and then jump off the water without even sinking below the surface. Sounds pretty fun, right? Well, according to that reporter from St. Louis, what actually happens when you go balloon jumping is you launch like a rocket up into the air and then wham, you get slammed back into the ground, spread out like a bearskin rug, and you're desperately trying to cling to the earth and scream for help, and then whoo, you just go flying off up into the air again to who knows where. Like, according to this guy, balloon jumping is a misnomer, because what really happens is you get jumped, bounced, thumped, and bumped. But as wild as that story is, the next one is even crazier. This one I found in a magazine from 1937, and the author here is actually a photographer who is invited to go balloon jumping at a golf course and take some pictures from up in the sky. The setup for this jumping session actually included multiple smaller balloons instead of one big one, but still, even with this unique balloon arrangement, the classic balloon jumping issues were still cropping up. On the first jump, the photographer just kind of got drug around in the dirt for a bit, and then on the second, he only made it about 25 feet up in the air. So before sending him up for a third time, the experts that he was working with actually added a few extra balloons and a 300-foot safety rope tied off to a nearby car, and off he went, bounding up in the air. And this time, things are actually seeming to be working out okay. Like, the photographer's going up and up and up, and he's 20 feet in the air and 30 feet in the air and 40 and higher, and you know, the more air he gets, the better of an angle he's getting with his camera. And then at about 100 feet up, the photographer hears a loud noise and feels a jerk in his rope. So he looks down and he realizes with absolute horror that his safety rope has just snapped. And he is now sailing across the golf course with the tail end of the broken rope dragging along behind him. And all the men that he was working with are desperately running across the course trying to grab a hold of that rope, and all the while the photographer is just floating higher and higher and higher. At one point, it almost looks like a golf caddy is about to reach out and grab the rope, but he trips and falls flat on his face, so there goes the photographer just completely free flying into a cloud bank 1,000 feet up with absolutely zero ability to steer or let himself down. He passes over highways and into fog banks and through rainstorms until finally he looks down, he recognizes the town that he's currently drifting over, and he realizes that he has drifted 13 miles from the golf course. He's now a half a mile above the ground. He is freezing cold and soaking wet and very, very quickly losing his strength. And then, bang, he hears a sound, a shot, and a hiss as one of the balloons starts losing air. Bang, bang, he hears more sounds and more hissing. Clearly, somebody is on the ground shooting out the balloons. Before long, the photographer starts losing altitude, and he floats lower and lower until finally he crash lands into a tree, stands up, dusts himself off, and shakes hands with Father Mullen, the local priest who just shot him out of the sky. Good thing Father Mullen was a crack shot. But okay, I feel like we're finally starting to reach the end of the balloon jumping story here. So how about we circle back to that article that I opened up the video with? What the heck happened with that guy that got electrocuted while balloon jumping, right? Well, it's actually a pretty bizarre story. Back in March of 1927, an English Royal Air Force parachutist named Dobbs was attempting a balloon jumping demonstration at an Air Force base that really was not going well. Like, he'd managed to jump over a fence and a small building, but he was also spending a whole lot of time getting yanked around in the mud and falling into ponds and getting blown into the bushes. And at one point, he even needed help from some of the onlookers because the balloon rigging actually wrapped around his neck and started choking him. Like, clearly the expo was not going very well. The spectators at this point were very much not impressed with balloon jumping. And so, near the end of the demonstration, Dobbs decided that he wanted to try and salvage this thing. He wanted to do something big. So he unlatched the safety rope from his harness and he took off across the field, trying to really get some speed and height going. And he cleared a hedge with no problem. And he jumped over a tree, no issue. And then he passed into a field, and suddenly, right in his path, was a set of electric wires hanging 25 feet off the ground. "Look out! Those are live wires," someone shouted from below. "It's all right. I'll risk it," Dobbs shouted back. And then, boom. He clips his legs on the wires and bursts into flame and hits the ground dead as a doornail. The only confirmed balloon jumping fatality that I could find. Now, I really don't want to laugh at this guy or make light of his death or anything like that, but there is one more crucial detail here that really makes this an especially crazy story. And that is that this was actually the very first introduction of balloon jumping to England. Yeah, the entire point of this event was to show the English population how cool and exciting this new American sport was. Just Just imagine this scene, like all this hype for this brand new activity, and then the spectators show up hoping to see some dazzling air show, and instead they watch a guy get dragged around in the mud, thrown into a pond, choked by his own equipment, and then electrocuted to death, all in the span of a single demonstration. It really, really is not that hard to see why balloon jumping never caught on. Thank you for watching.